avoir un team. Puis là, bon, j'ai dit, je vais essayer, on ne sait jamais.
Il y a Steven qui le faisait plus tôt, puis là, qui va arriver du shuffle en sueur tout de suite après.
Ah oui.
ce qui est un peu intense.
Aïe, aïe, aïe.
Ouais.
Non, parce qu'il arrive là-bas à 2 heures.
Ah,
c'est pas ça.
Il est quelle
Are we
heure,
ready?
2 heures maintenant? Ah, OK, c'est ça qu'il va faire. Okay.
Are we ready to go? Good. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, guys. Welcome back to our second conversation of the day in Research and Conversation in the Faculty of Arts and Science. I'm going to hand it over to you, Patrick.
Thank you. Welcome back. Those of you who have been following this series of conversations, we're on conversation number 11 over the past 5 days. I'm pleased to have André Gagné, professor in theological studies, here with us today. And André's specialization really is on the religious right and its impact in the U.S., or specialization over the past few years, certainly. That's where you've gone. I'll just give a general presentation of who you are and sort of what led you here, and then I guess we can dive in and talk about these issues.
Great.
So André is a full professor in the Department of Theological Studies here at Concordia. He has a joint PhD, co-tutelle in theology from l'Université catholique de Louvain in Belgium and l'Université de Montréal. His teaching and scholarship focus on political ideology, religious and political violence, the Christian right, Neo-Charismatic Pentecostalism.
That's a long one.
To slow down. Evangelism. Oh, good God. I should have practiced these. The evangelical religions and the interpretation and reception of the Bible. Dr. Gagné's work and interviews have been featured in media outlets everywhere. New York Times, Washington Post, Huffington Post, The Guardian, New Republic, Al Jazeera, and so on, The Figaro. We've heard your thoughts, your opinions, your analysis on what's happening in the U.S. Numerous times on the conversation as well. You're a very present person in the media, and it's really an opportunity. It's a great opportunity for us to have you here in perhaps a longer, more extended, hopefully deeper context. We won't be speaking in sound bites. You'll have time to elaborate and really go deeply into some of these ideas. You've been at Concordia since 2008.
Yeah.
Not quite 20, but
yeah.
You're getting there.
Yeah.
You've published 7 books in co-edited volumes, 37 articles and book chapters. Some of the books that I think we should mention, Religion and Violence in Western Traditions, which was co-edited with Jennifer Guiver and Gerben Oegama. Evangelical Trump supporters was a theme for Ces Évangéliques derrière Trump, which we'll talk about in a moment. You co-edited also The Global Impact of Religious Violence, with colleagues as well, and I think that's the year where you won the Media Award.
That's probably
right.
2016. Probably.
2016,
yeah.
So where you were omnipresent across the media, thanks to your work, and you won the Opinion Leader of the Year, the President's Media, part of the President's Media Awards, New Scholar Award in 2016, and 6 times you've been named the Newsmaker of the month over the past 10 years. So you're a consistent figure in analyzing these extremwe pressing issues. I'm curious, so your new book, Ces Évangéliques derrière Trump. When we were discussing this before the conversation, my colleague and co-conspirator with this conversation series, Rebecca Ackman, asked me, I wonder why he wrote this in French. rather than in English. And I asked you the same question just moments ago. So how did this come out in French first?
Yeah.
Did you think this in French? What is the context?
Yeah. No, I didn't think this in French. By the way, thank you very much for this opportunity. It's
pleasure.
great. It's really great to be here. No, I wasn't thinking about this in French at all. A lot of the research that I was doing was actually in English. And I'm quite active on Twitter also, so I share a lot of the insights, often in sound bites, of course, very short insights on these issues, especially around the 2020 election and during the Trump presidency and the relationship between religion and politics, especially in the US at that time. Now, I have some colleagues on Twitter that saw my work and invited me. I have a colleague by the name of Philippe Gonzalez, who is a professor at Lausanne, who is also the director of a collection at the publishing house called Labor et Fides, a collection called Enquête, Inquiries. And he said to me, André, we would really like you to publish a book on the situation in America, especially the American evangelical Trump supporters, because we in Europe don't understand all of this. Like we have a really hard time trying to grasp, the relationship between religion and politics. It's not like this for us. And I had a challenge because that was in early February of 2020, around mid-February, I said, yes. And they said, you need to deliver this book at the end of May. Okay. So can you imagine, like I was writing really in an intensive mode for about 3 months. And the book came out September 2nd of that year, just prior to the election, and of course it was released first of all in Europe, and that generated a lot of media opportunities because journalists were reading the book, and the publishing house was sending the book to various media outlets. So it was a French book. It's going to be translated into English. We just managed to get the contract signed between Labor et Fides and Routledge. So I have to work on a preface trying to explain to American or English readers where this book comes from, contextualize the book, and then an epilogue which will kind of explain a bit where we are now, because the book ends just a few months prior to the 2020 election. So what happened after that? What is the Trump legacy? What is the religious rights legacy after Trump's defeat? Which he doesn't admit, but that's another question.
Well, allow me to ask you, what is the legacy after Trump's defeat?
Oh, it's a lot of things, in fact. During his mandate, Trump, there was a kind of a transactional relationship between what we call the religious right, but I prefer often to use the expression maybe Christian right, because we're dealing with a lot of people that have a Christian identity. Okay. But religious right is fine. People understand what we mean. So there was this kind of transactional relationship between Trump and the Christian right. Trump needed their support, and the Christian right needed Trump because they had their own grievances. They had their own needs. Some of the things that they worried for many, many years, as we know, was the issue around abortion, issues around rights of Christians. Often they felt that the religious liberty was stifled. So Trump had a listening ear towards these individuals. He was close to several key leaders of the Christian right. And what happened is that he promised them a bunch of things. For example, he managed to get on the Supreme Court 3 conservative judges. This is something that he promised them. He managed to get a bunch of conservative federal judges across the country. He did something that evangelicals were ecstatic about when he, in 2018, decided that the U.S. Embassy would move from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
So these are all things that were, that rejoiced the Christian right. And that's part of his legacy. Now, we've seen, in a sense, with the change of guards for the Supreme Court, the reversal of Roe versus Wade.
Yeah.
So these are things that are, this is part of Trump's legacy. And despite the fact that Trump has lost the election, and of course he's promoting this idea of the big lie, that it's not true, the election was stolen. The Christian right is still, despite that, galvanized and continue to push to make sure that Trump will either come back or there will be someone favorable in their eyes that will eventually run. We're close to the midterms now, and there are candidates that are very, very much aligned with the Christian right, and they're going to push to make sure that the Democrats don't get a hold of the House and the Senate, because the Democrats promised, at least Biden said, that he wants to codify Roe. So if he has the House and the Senate, he might be able to try to move in that direction.
What on earth predisposed Trump to be so close to the Christian right? There's something to me baffling.
It is.
He's not, he's not particularly virtuous. His behavior does not fall into what one would expect from the religious rights values.
Yeah.
He's a charismatic figure. That I think is quite clear.
Yeah.
But how did this happen? And beyond the sort of cynical opportunism, I guess that we can project onto this, how did they meet? And why was that?
Yeah.
Why did that work?
This is a very good. This is actually the question that I always have, because people don't understand the relationship between religious people and Trump. He doesn't seem to embody, religious values. Virtuous, religious kind of values. Now, the Christian right, you're absolutely correct in saying that, in the past, when they did lend some support to some candidates, we think in 1976 with Jimmy Carter, who was a self-avowed born-again Christian, they supported him. They supported Reagan, who had used the label evangelical for himself.
Right.
George Bush during the Iraqi wars and all of that. These are people that were, they seem to embody, up to a certain extent, some of these values. Trump, it's very different. Now, the first kind of contact with Trump and evangelicals really happened in September 2015. There was a key individual a woman by the name of Paula White-Cain, who is very popular in Christian circles. She is what we call a tele-evangelist. Sometimes she's labeled by the media as a prosperity gospel preacher. Okay. Very charismatic figure. And Trump watched her on television. And it happened that they got in contact. Trump, even before becoming a president, she had a contact with Trump. And so when Trump decided to go and present himself as a candidate for the Republican Party, they kind of got together at one point, and she says she took the initiative of trying to assemble evangelicals in September of 2019 at Trump Towers so that Trump could meet key evangelical leaders. And he met them, and he listened to them. And they listened to him, and it's from that moment on, this woman managed to create this coalition of evangelicals for Trump. And Trump, of course, he seized that opportunity. But out of this group also, there was a kind of, you have amongst these evangelicals, you have evangelicals that we label often, and it was a long name that you mentioned, Neo-Charismatic Pentecostals, which are evangelicals that give a lot of support or believe in what we call the gifts of the Spirit. Like gifts of the Spirit are prophecy, healing, miracles, speaking in tongues, glossolalia, things like that. So some of these more charismatic leaning evangelicals, there was one in particular that wrote a book. In his book he explains how he got a supposedly revelation from God that Trump was chosen by God for this mission. So just to make a very, very long story short, they kind of envisioned Trump as, even the mainstream media took this over at one point. There was a time period where they took over the idea that was spread by these charismatic evangelicals, that Trump was a kind of modern day King Cyrus. Like King Cyrus was this Persian king, 6th century before Common Era. We read about him in the Bible. He's a pagan king, but God, where we read about him in the Bible, God calls him his chosen one to deliver the ancient Israelites from bondage. They had been under bondage under the Babylonians. So Trump is this kind of new modern day Cyrus figure, despite the fact that he is not particularly virtuous or religious. King Cyrus was not virtuous, was not religious, and God used him. So there's this kind of myth around Trump as being a chosen vessel by God for a particular type of mission for the unraveling of America. This individual that I'm talking about actually wrote a book called God's Chaos Candidate, Donald Trump and the Unraveling of America. And he explains how he got this revelation from God that Trump would be this new anointed leader for the country. So this is how this coalition of more leaning type of, I would say, charismatic types of evangelicals really supported Trump. And my book focuses a lot on this stream of evangelicalism, this stream of more charismatic-minded evangelicals and their support for Trump.
Right. How many evangelical voters are there in the U.S.? And
Now,
why do they have so much impact?
Yeah, that's in the U.S. at the moment. Well, the American population at the moment is around 331 million. So when we take evangelicals, there's about 100 million evangelicals. 110 million, sorry, evangelicals.
So fully a third.
So you have a third.
Yeah.
Now, if we would zero in on those neo-charismatics, okay, and when we talk about evangelical supporters of Trump, we have to say not all evangelicals necessarily supported Trump also. And not all neo-charismatic Pentecostals would have supported Trump either. Right. But if we go with numbers of how many they are, on that 100 million, these neo-charismatic Pentecostals would be about 41 million. So it's a lot of people, okay? Now, what is the exact percentage of that? We know from the exiting polls in 2016, 81% of white evangelicals supported Trump. He had like 50% of the Catholic vote. Right. In 2020, that same proportion didn't change. So you have, depending on the exit polls, you have between 76% and up to 84% of white evangelicals that voted for Trump in 2020. And about the same numbers.
And they vote.
And they vote. That, Patrick, you're absolutely right. They're an incredibly well-oiled voting machine because they've been doing this for the past 30, 40, 50 years, you see. And there's nothing comparable on the quote-unquote left in terms of organization.
So I can see the connections with the charismatic features in Trump as a candidate and eventually as a post-president. He maintains that strange charisma. Like it's a surprising one. Do you think he bought into the myth making that you described in that earlier book?
He uses it for sure. I don't know if you remember, there was a time where he was very heavy on the sanctions against China.
Yeah.
And he used to make he used to have these outdoors press conferences with the media. It was interesting because he was just there, they were asking questions and he was responding. And in one of the press conferences outdoors, at one point, he's talking about China and he's talking about sanctions, and he's just going to say, I am the chosen one. He says it and this was taken over by the mainstream media. What is he? Is he crazy? And people that are observing this on the researching the Christian right, saying he's actually using this, you see, to support decisions that he's making in terms of policy. I am the chosen one. You see, I am the one responsible for America. At the same time, it's ambiguous to what extent he buys in, or does he really believe it? Because, when he met often with evangelicals, they had sessions where they prayed for him. They were around him, they laid hands praying for him. And his disgraced lawyer, Michael Cohen, who went to prison and turned against Trump, as you know, he wrote this book. And at one point, he talks about the relationship between Trump and evangelicals. And Cohen reports at one point a conversation after a prayer session and discussions amongst evangelicals. And turns to Cohen, he says, "Do you believe this? Can you believe this stuff?" And Cohen reports that as a way to discredit Trump in the face of evangelicals. But at the same time, it's what we were saying about that transactional rapport between them and him. Just another example in terms of using this to his advantage. In 2020, just a couple of, I would say about a week or two just prior to the election moment, Trump, for the first time, went out publicly and said to the people that, his supporters and evangelicals that were there, he labeled himself as being what he calls, and what is called also in the jargon, a non-denominational Christian. Meaning that, and this was, it spoke to his evangelical base, because a lot of these Neo-Charismatic Pentecostals often emerge from independent churches that are not necessarily tied to a specific denomination. So they function a bit like their own personal enterprise, you see. So he's connecting with these people when he's saying that, because Trump has always been like a nominal Presbyterian. So about a week before the final, moment in the ballot box in 2020, he just declares publicly that he's a non-denominational Christian. So why does he say that? So he's using the language of these people. It's like the photo op after, in front of the church with the Bible, during the riots.
Yeah.
So he holds the Bible upside down. It's like, I'm the defender of your religious freedom.
Right.
I'm the one that's going to speak for you and defend you.
He's manipulating language and symbols, and he's done that with QAnon as well.
Absolutely,
just
absolutely.
Feeding just enough.
Exactly, just the amount to kind of, we say in French, laisser planer le doute, to lead, so that people are not sure, where is he positioning? Is he for us, against us?
Right.
The way he uses dog whistles to, in terms of the far right stand down,
right, yeah.
in terms of the Proud Boys during the debate, things like that.
Huh. So your training is in theology.
Yes.
and for a moment there, I thought, we're having a political science discussion.
Yeah.
How did you manage to? Or I guess the the topic was like presented itself in a certain
Yes.
way. But how did you end up being so consumed by this charismatic figure, and other examples of the marriage of the religious right and politics?
It's because people have a tendency sometimes to, and it's a great question, in fact, Patrick, and I try to illustrate that in my class. I teach 2 courses this semester. One is Bible and U.S. politics, and the other one is religion and politics.
Okay.
And a lot of my students in the religion and politics class are political science students. And it's interesting sometimes to have the reaction of students in my course because they're used to political science.
Right.
And they don't always immediately recognize the relationship between religion and politics and how politics is infused with religious ideas and theological concepts much more than we think.
Yeah.
And this is what, in a sense, led me to kind of say, I need to speak about this because I think I can speak about this. I understand what theology is. This is my training. My training is also, and you mentioned this, in terms of the Bible. So my thesis was on biblical texts. So I'm very, very familiar with that world. And it's interesting for me to look at modern religious groups and how they take over that language and use it politically. And it's a way for me to actually make my research relevant. For me, it's important as a scholar to kind of connect with, when possible, issues of relevance. Sometimes we have this image of the scholar, which is not, it's not to criticize that, but the scholar that is a bit in his ivory tower and nobody understands what he says. And there was a time, no, but there was a time in my own academic journey when I was meeting people outside that were not necessarily in the academic world, and they were asking me what I was doing, and I was trying, struggling explaining what I was doing, and it didn't connect. Now I can just tell them, I'm talking about this. You see what's happening in America. So it's, in a sense, I think that my training, my expertise has permitted me to be able to kind of speak on these issues and bridge the, what seems to be out of touch theology. Who talks about theology today? No, theology is extremely relevant. You can't understand these groups and how they're involved politically if you don't understand the theology and the religious language behind it.
If you had to give me an elevator pitch of what is theology in 1 minute, what would that be?
It's essentially a discourse on the divine. It's essentially how we speak of the divine. Theology is theos logos. It's a discourse on God. So how do people think about the divine? How do people think or talk about the divine? And what does it mean for them? Like, how does it define their identity? Because it's, the religious identities are very much tied and they're very personal. So when we talk about who a person is, often, and especially if a person embraces a particular religious worldview, that worldview becomes part of his or her own identity. So theology is really about, examining how people talk about the transcendent. You see? The transcendent.
And what would be, if I asked you to sketch out, you see where I'm going, a theology of Trumpism?
Goodness
What
gracious.
might that look like? And is it even conceivable right
Yes,
now?
Trumpism in a sense is a bit like, it's a kind of a fusion between what we would call maybe American fundamentalism, like the Christianity, the Christian identity, with a bit of American civil religion, or the idea that America is a chosen nation, American exceptionalism.
Right, the manifest destiny.
That's it, the kind of the manifest destiny, you see? This is what Trumpism is. It kind of incarnates that in a sense.
And
Even if he's not that successful.
No, of
when you
course, of
think
course.
about
No,
it.
no. It's sort of it's a perverse question, but I was just
Yeah,
thinking
yeah.
as you were describing what theology
Yeah,
is,
yeah.
it helps us understand basically the framework you're working
Yeah.
from. And when working with a charismatic figure, even if it's a Cyrus
Yeah,
inspired
yeah,
one,
yeah.
I guess there must be certain expectations, certain codifications, certain rituals also that are emerging from.
But
from
you
his
see,
practice.
yes, and you see with Trump, he's having these rallies now.
Right. Yeah.
And these rallies almost are becoming religious in a sense. Recently, one of the recent rallies, you had people with their arms, like this, with one finger standing, and there was, like, Trump was reading out of his teleprompter, but the way he was reading, there was background music. It sounded almost like, and commentators had noticed that, it sounded almost like an altar call. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept.
No.
An altar call in a lot of Protestant churches, evangelical churches, it's the moment after the preacher finishes his sermon, he invites people to bow their heads and close their eyes, and he just speaks to their hearts about their need for Jesus. And usually there's a kind of an emotional atmosphere with the lights are dimmed, and there's kind of a soft music in the background, often just piano or synthesizer, just to kind of get to the emotional drive in people and invite them, if they want to receive Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior, to invite them up front and go through this process of what is called the repentance prayer and accept Jesus as their, become born again. So Trump rallies sometimes, that last Trump rally, was that kind of atmosphere was there, you see. So yes, you have these people that cling to Trump, Trump is my president, Christ is the king, but Trump is the president. So you have it. You have all of this. The rituals are there, the code words are there, and some scholars. I have one of my PhD students who's probably I would say one of the top QAnon specialists in the world now.
Okay. Yeah.
That really is examining the QAnon nexus.
Yeah.
That you're wondering if this is not some sort of hyper-religious movement, new religious movement that kind of emerges through this kind of syncretism between different streams of ideologies.
Syncretism, yes. I see.
Yeah.
But where you basically combine different religious discourses,
Yes,
forms, more
ideas,
native forms,
that's
and
it.
emergent forms.
Yeah.
Should we be concerned about all this?
I think we should be concerned. People thought that the Christian right would die at one point. They were very strong. They came up strong in the 70s due to Roe versus Wade.
Right.
They had built a strong coalition. In 1976, like I said, they managed to have Jimmy Carter elected. They weren't satisfied with Carter. He wasn't tough enough against certain things that they held dear to.
Okay.
So they got Reagan to replace him. And in 1979, they formed a very, very strong coalition called the Moral Majority. And that's at the time that people in America started realizing that the evangelical bloc is a serious voting bloc. And they got Reagan elected for two terms. There was George W. Bush Sr. got elected. Then Clinton, there was a drop in the Christian right. It wasn't, he was elected for two mandates. Then you had George Bush, the son. Right. That again, the Christian right again, and this is a born again president. With Obama, people thought that the Christian right was over, and then you have Trump in 2016, and it's not going away. It's not going away. It's growing, and we should be concerned because their political project is to transform society. I didn't have time to mention this. I do explain this in the book. Their political theology of power is what we call dominionism. Dominionism, which is a theocratic idea where Christians are called by God to actually dominate the world or society by taking over political and social institutions.
Fascinating.
Okay, so this
Yeah.
is the political project of many of these people on the Christian right.
Wow.
Now, the mainstream media is not always aware of that. So that's why you have a lot of independent researchers. You have researchers, university researchers that are interested by this stuff, that try to write on it. But now it's starting to kind of come to the attention of the mainstream media because of what we saw with Trump, what we saw at the Capitol, January 6th insurrection, and the possibility of having new candidates, governors that are leaning Christian right individuals.
Wow. So if we bring back our lens to Montreal, Quebec, Canada, so we're a week or so away from an election in Quebec, where we've seen the Conservative Party emerge from basically the grave, like it essentially disappeared. We've just seen Pierre Poilievre win a convincing majority in the federal Conservative Party, with some allusions to and some reaching out perhaps to the religious right. What's going on? Can you give us a sense of some parallels, but also some differences between what's happening in the U.S. and in Canada for that?
In Canada, there is a Christian right, but it doesn't have the impact. It's incomparable because it doesn't have the numbers. It doesn't have the networks, as much as what we see in the U.S., especially the numbers. The U.S. can make this, the Christian right can leave its imprint. In the U.S., they're a third of the population. Here, you have, if you talk about evangelicals, if we just stick with evangelicals, there's maybe 5 million evangelicals. There's not, it's incomparable. And the Christian right is not just evangelicals, it's also Catholics and all of that. But the situation is not the same. Now, it doesn't mean that there aren't never political ambitions on the part of more conservative religious figures. There are. During the Stephen Harper years, there were close relations with people that we could label as being Christian right. There were journalists at the time that had written on this, that tried to kind of show some forms of parallels, but also major differences. The thing is, until we get those types of numbers, the place of Christianity in Canada is much more secular. It's incomparable. Even if the U.S. says or promotes the idea of separation of church and state, religion is pretty much prevalent everywhere. So we're in a different context. We look at the Conservative Party here in Quebec. You see, there's no religious undertone there. Even if you would have, people that are pro-life. I think one of the candidates or two from that party is pro-life. Now, Duhem, in his context, he will say, no, the person is going to follow the line of the party, and the line of the party is choice, and it's pro-choice. So you're not going to have that kind of thing here yet. It doesn't mean that some people would not fantasize of having that, but it's not there. With Poilievre, what happens is, you have in that party, there's a segment of that party that's more attached to social conservative values. And his challenge, even if he's very much libertarian and free choice for everyone, his challenge will be to retain these people. And he seems to have managed with the high the high popularity vote that he got, he seemed to have managed. We could have been worried with some kind of fracture in the party, which doesn't mean it won't happen. There are more progressive conservatives in the party that really don't want anything to do with social conservative values as would be imagined by the Christian right. So we're not in the same things, but it doesn't mean that people can't be, have to ignore what's going on in the US and not think that nothing of this can never happen here. I think we have to learn from what's happening in the US and always be, aware of the possible coalitions that people have made to get to, their political ends.
And we've seen in Brazil,
Absolutely.
Bolsonaro has learned from what happened in the US.
Absolutely.
He's harvested that.
Yeah, Brazilian Trump. Absolutely. 75% of evangelicals voted for Bolsonaro. Yeah.
And so what's next? We don't know if Trump will present and run for president. Sorry, if he'll be allowed to, if he'll be in jail.
That's
and so I guess there's like an infinite source of inquiry on your side.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you want to keep on digging into that topic, or are you opening up onto different variations, different discourses on the religious right in the U.S.?
Yeah. Of course, I'm going to be tracking this and monitoring this closely, trying to see if Trump doesn't make it, are there other potential candidates that, align even better than Trump?
Okay.
Like when I'm thinking about someone like Doug Mastriano, who is running for governor in Pennsylvania at the moment, extremely close to the Christian right, to what I call dominionist groups. He fits even better in terms of, he fits the bill even better.
So he's not a Cyrus figure. He's
even better, like a
David figure.
He's he fits the model of what a Christian at least should be.
Okay.
So you might have actors like that. That's interesting. At the same time, I'm very much interested in looking at the possible international networks that develop out of this, out of specific groups that are embedded in the Christian right. There are specific Neo-Charismatic Pentecostal groups that are politically leaning and that seem to have networks. Of course, they do have networks in the US, but their networks spawn internationally. And they try to penetrate elsewhere internationally, in other countries. So that I'm kind of leaning towards kind of exploring what are the possible impacts of this, we would say, exportation of Christian right ideas elsewhere.
So in summary, you have
lifetime work.
Lifetime work, exponentially growing topic.
Absolutely.
And thank you so much for sharing this with us today.
Thank you for having me. It was great being here. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if there are questions. Do we have time for questions? Wait. Yeah. So we have a few minutes. If you have questions online, I can't see you right now, but or in-house. Yeah. The mic's coming over. Yeah. Just over here.
Thank you. My question is, do you see these kinds of developments in other religions too? Other religious people also are moving forward in similar direction? And would you like to also have an opinion on what's happening in India or other parts of the world where religions are coming to as major players?
Yes, we can talk about, and one of the expressions that is used to describe the phenomenon in America is that's used by the media pretty much is Christian nationalism. Yes, you'll have those types of manifestations in other dimensions, in other possibilities and other religions that will kind of want to impose their religious views on their own populations. I know you yourself come from India and you know the experience of Hinduism in India that is also having this kind of, or going in this kind of direction of Hindu nationalism, which of course what it does is affects pluralism. It affects the place and the role and the standing of other religions. Now when we talk about Christian nationalism or the Christian right in America, it is not a pluralistic project, you see. They're not against necessarily other religions, but in the sense Christianity should be prominent. Should not be treated like any other religion. Whereas if you're in in a pluralistic society, religions are options that are equal for others. You can be religious, you can choose your religion, there's no preference in which religion you have or what the government would do for that religion, and you can be non-religious if you want to, you see. So yes, there are possibilities in other countries, and it plays a lot with the demographics, it plays a lot with the population weight that's behind a particular religion and religious tradition. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm being told that's all the time we have. Okay. We're going to have a short break before the final conversation. I'd like to thank you, André, for being part of this exercise and sharing your expertise. I really appreciate it. Thank you to the Fourth Space as well for hosting us this week. Thanks, Rebecca Ackman, for doing all the work behind the scenes, and to the Dean, the Dean of Arts and Science, for allowing me to sit here and engage with my colleagues for many hours this week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, just a quick note for the folks on Zoom. Thanks so much for joining us, and we will be taking a 15-minute pause if you want to stick around for the final conversation of the week in this series. We'll be back here in 15 minutes with Stephen Yeager. Thanks, everybody. Bye.